Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling quite a significant shift, really, in how carbon credits are generated for projects that protect forests,
Hmm.
specifically those stopping deforestation that wasn't, planned.
Right, the unexpected stuff.
Exactly. Vera has rolled out this new methodology. It's called VM0048. And our goal here is to basically break down the technical bits for you, give you the essentials of what's changing and why it matters.
Yeah, it's definitely more than just tweaking the old rules. It feels like a fundamental rethink for these avoided, unplanned deforestation projects. We'll be using Vera's own technical webinar and their documents to sort of guide us through it.
And it's worth pointing out, this wasn't developed in isolation, right? Vera worked with quite a few players.
Oh, absolutely. A real collaboration. You've got groups like Green Collar, Wildlife Conservation Society, Climate Focus, Carbon Decisions International, Silvestrum, Terra Carbon,
Right.
Clark Labs for the data side of things, and Manuel Strada was involved too. So a lot of expertise went into this.
Okay, so a broad base of input. How is it structured then, this new approach?
Well, think of VM0048 as the main framework, the kind of the umbrella for REDD plus projects going forward.
Okay.
Then under that, you have VMD0055, and that module is specifically focused on calculating the emission cuts from avoiding unplanned deforestation.
Unplanned.
Got it.
Yeah, that's key, because Vera's already flagged that more modules are coming, one for planned deforestation, which is different, and another for unplanned forest degradation, which is also complex.
So VM48 is the big picture. VMD45 is today's focus on unplanned loss, and we should expect more details later.
Makes sense. Now, does this mean throwing out everything we knew, or does it connect to existing systems?
That's a good point. No, it definitely builds on what's already there.
Right.
VM0048 actually leverages existing VCS-verified carbon standard modules and tools.
Ah, okay.
So folks working in this space should find some familiar ground, which hopefully makes the transition, a bit smoother.
Right. Less of a steep learning curve, perhaps. Okay, let's get into the meat of it. One of the biggest changes seems to be around baselines figuring out what would happen anyway. Tell us about this jurisdictional activity data.
This is really central. So instead of each project figuring out its own historical deforestation rates.
Which could vary quite a bit, I imagine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, Vera will establish that deforestation data at a larger scale, the jurisdictional level. Think regions, states, provinces, and they'll get this data via specialized providers.
Okay, so Vera is taking charge of setting that baseline for bigger areas. How does that process actually work? How do they arrive at that data?
It's a multi-step thing. First, Vera gets the initial data set up for the jurisdiction. Then, and this is important, stakeholders get a chance to weigh in.
Like project developers,
Yeah.
local groups?
Yeah, exactly. They can provide feedback. After that, the data goes through an independent technical assessment, which Vera oversees, just to ensure it's solid.
Okay, so there's oversight and an opportunity for input. Sounds more robust. And once this jurisdictional data exists, how do individual projects use it?
Right. So once it's finalized, Vera allocates this data to the projects operating within that jurisdiction. It's a big change from proponents having to gather and justify their own historical rates.
A shift in responsibility.
Definitely. And Vera has indicated they'll use administrative boundaries like, country down to state or province, maybe even district level, to define these jurisdictions. The exact choices are laid out in the methodology docs.
So a more standardized baseline setting. What about the timing? When do projects have to start using this new system?
The rule is, once the jurisdictional activity data for a specific region has been officially available for 6 months, any new project starting in that region must use VM0048 and VMD0055.
6 months, okay. And before that?
Before that 6-month window closes, they can still opt to use the older existing Vera methodologies.
What about projects already up and running using older methods like VM6, 7, or 15? Is it an immediate switch for them?
No, there's a grace period. They get 1 year from when the public comment period for VM0048 started to get their validation finalized under those older methods.
Ah, okay. Some breathing room for ongoing work. That seems fair. Now, many projects aren't just about avoiding deforestation, right? They might also be doing reforestation or other things. How does that fit in?
Good question. Vera's made it clear that you can still use elements from other existing methodologies for activities that aren't covered yet by VM000048 or VMD0055.
So you can combine things.
Yes, exactly. You can combine different activity types under other relevant VCS methodologies. It allows for, a more integrated approach if your project is doing multiple things on the landscape.
Okay, so it's flexible in that sense. How will projects know when this crucial jurisdictional data is actually ready for their area?
Vera's going to post updates on their website. They have an activity data page, and they'll update that as data becomes available for each jurisdiction. That's the place to watch.
Got it. Check the Vera website. Okay, let's talk about another critical piece. Project boundaries and leakage. That's the risk that stopping deforestation here just pushes it over there. How does VM0048 handle leakage?
Well, again, there's more standardization. Key things like the actual jurisdictional boundary, something called a leakage belt, and even the baseline eligibility criteria. Vera defines these for each jurisdiction.
Okay, tell me more about this leakage belt. What exactly is that?
Think of it as a defined zone immediately surrounding the project area. It's where you'd most expect deforestation by, say, local farmers or communities who might be geographically constrained to potentially shift if they can no longer access the project land.
So like a buffer zone they watch closely.
Precisely. It's monitored specifically for this displacement effect. Vera defines its spatial extent and provides baseline activity data for this belt too.
Right. But what if the deforestation moves further away, maybe by more mobile actors outside this immediate belt?
That's where another concept comes in. Land available for activity shifting leakage. This refers to areas outside both the project and the leakage belt.
Okay.
Vera will also define this, looking at factors like land suitability for agriculture, accessibility, and whether it's protected or not, trying to anticipate where deforestation might pop up elsewhere.
Sounds like a more comprehensive attempt to track displacement. Do projects have to actively try and manage this leakage?
Yes, absolutely. Project design still needs to incorporate leakage management zones, areas where they implement specific activities to minimize this displacement.
Okay.
And importantly, the methodology requires accounting for potential increases in things like charcoal production, fuel wood gathering, or timber harvesting that might happen outside the project area because of the project's activities.
Ah, so indirect effects, too.
Right. Those potential emission increases have to be subtracted to get the net emission reductions the project can claim.
Makes sense for accuracy. You mentioned something earlier, PropMig. What's that about?
Ah, yes, PropMig. It stands for the migrating prog. Basically, it's a factor used to assess potential leakage outside that defined leakage belt.
Okay.
It represents an estimate of the proportion of recent migrants into the broader region who are typically engaged in deforestation activities. It helps gauge the risk of deforestation shifting to more distant areas due to population movement, possibly influenced by the project.
Interesting. So really trying to model those complex human dynamics. Okay, let's shift to the core calculations. How does VMD0055 actually quantify the emission reductions, the baseline, the monitoring?
Right, so VMD0055 is all about accounting for the emission cuts from stopping that unplanned deforestation. It sets out procedures for a few key things.
Like what?
Okay, first, how to collect the activity data on unplanned deforestation and create forest cover benchmark maps. Now, this responsibility falls primarily to Vera, or maybe a jurisdictional body in some case.
Okay, not the project proponent then.
Generally not for the baseline activity data collection, no. Second, it details estimating baseline emissions that's based on carbon stock changes using the activity data Vera provides. Third, estimating leakage emissions, that displacement we discussed. And fourth, the methods projects must use for monitoring emissions within their project area and the leakage belt.
So a clear process, is there a specific tool involved?
Yes, a key one is the VT0007 Unplanned Deforestation Allocation Tool. This helps apply that broader jurisdictional data specifically to the project's footprint and leakage belt.
Right.
And obviously, defining the project area itself, the UDEF-PA they call it, is fundamental.
Makes sense. How long are these baselines good for? Do they expire?
They use the term Baseline Validity Period, or BVP. Vera provides the projected annual baseline deforestation rates for the project area and leakage belt based on this BVP. Projects then take that Vera-provided data, combine it with their own detailed forest maps and risk maps, and use that combo to calculate their specific baseline emissions scenario. There's also an option for projects to align with future jurisdictional BVPs, which could help with long-term planning.
So Vera gives the rate, projects apply it spatially with their maps. What if a project calculates its own baseline emissions factors?
If they develop their own emission factors, say for carbon stocks, Vera might apply a discount for uncertainty. The methodology is quite focused on quantifying and managing uncertainty.
Right, always crucial in carbon accounting. What carbon sources or pools are included in these calculations? Is it just trees?
No, it's pretty comprehensive. It covers above ground and below ground biomass for both trees and non-tree vegetation, deadwood, litter, soil organic carbon, and even harvested wood products if they're long-term.
Wow, okay. Very thorough. And how is uncertainty handled for these carbon stock estimates?
There's a requirement for a rigorous uncertainty assessment for all the carbon stock estimates. Then, based on the level of uncertainty found, discount factors are applied to the emission reduction claims.
So higher uncertainty means fewer credits.
Essentially, yes, it incentivizes robust measurement. If the uncertainty is deemed too high, the docs mention over 100%, projects basically have to go back and collect more data to bring that uncertainty down.
Right, a push for better data. Now, Vera provides the baseline activity data, but what about ongoing monitoring? Who does that?
Good distinction. While Vera provides the historical baseline activity data, the project proponents themselves are still responsible for the ongoing monitoring within their project area and leakage belt.
Okay.
They need to track actual deforestation, look for signs of degradation like new roads, canopy loss, that sort of thing.
Is Vera planning to provide monitoring data too, eventually?
They've said not in the near term,
Mm-hmm.
but they are considering it for the future, as it would align logically with them providing the baseline data. So maybe down the road.
Something to watch. What about permanence? The 40-year commitment for REDD plus projects. Any changes there with VM0048?
No change to the duration. Project longevity remains 40 years from the start date. That's still the standard.
Okay, good. And the buffer pool contribution, the insurance mechanism.
The minimum contribution requirements for the non-permanence risk buffer haven't changed, and the basic way permanence is assessed is the same. However, Vera did recently update their non-permanence risk tool, and projects will need to use that updated tool at their next verification after a grace period ends. So the calculation method for the risk buffer might change slightly based on that new tool.
Got it. Same principle, updated tool.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier something about reassessing past credits. Why would a project do that?
Or there's an option being explored, mainly thinking about eligibility for initiatives like the ICBM, the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market. If a project has a lot of older, unsold credits generated under a previous methodology, they might be able to reevaluate those periods using VM0048. If that reassessment helps them meet newer standards like ICBMs, it could potentially increase the value or marketability of those credits.
Interesting.
But Vera's indicated this would likely be via a specific call for interest, and probably only viable for projects with a really significant volume of those older unused credits.
Okay, a niche possibility perhaps. It sounds like there are quite a few specific tools and data sets involved. Can you highlight the key ones again?
Sure. Vera mentioned an updated risk and allocation tool plus related software is expected probably in Q1 of next year. That'll be crucial for implementation.
And the risk maps themselves, what do the values on those maps actually mean?
The values are in hectares per pixel per year. So each tiny square on the map gets a number representing the estimated baseline deforestation likelihood for that specific spot per year. You add those up across your project area to get the total estimated baseline deforestation.
A very granular risk assessment. And the activity data Vera provides, what does that look like?
It's point-based data. They use random stratified sampling across the benchmark forest map. At each point, they analyze high-res imagery to see if it stayed forest, got deforested, stayed non-forest, or regrew during the reference period.
Okay.
This sample data helps estimate the overall deforestation rate for the whole jurisdiction, which then acts as an adjustment factor in that VT0007 allocation tool to ensure the risk map predictions align with observed rates.
Got it. Risk map shows where activity data helps calibrate how much. What satellites and other sources feed into making these?
It's a mix. Optical data from Landsat, radar from Sentinel-1, and the Japanese ALOS satellites. They also use the Copernicus GLO30 DEM for terrain info elevation, slope. And for carbon storage estimates in one specific product, they use LiDAR data.
Quite the toolkit. What if a project thinks it has better, more accurate local risk information? Can they submit their own improved risk map?
The indication from Vera is generally no. For consistency across the program, projects will likely be required to use the Vera-provided risk maps. It ensures everyone is working from the same standardized base.
Okay, standardization wins out there. Are all forest types covered? What about mangroves, for instance?
Good point. Mangrove projects are specifically not eligible under VM0048. They need to continue using the dedicated mangrove methodology, which is VM0007.
Right, different system for those coastal forests. What if a project wants to start using VM0048 in a region where Vera hasn't released the jurisdictional baseline data yet? What do they do?
They basically have two options. Either wait until Vera publishes that data for their jurisdiction or start under a different currently applicable methodology and plan to transition to VM0048 later once the data is available. Vera did say they'd release course resolution risk maps in the meantime, though.
Okay, patience might be needed depending on location. All right, let's try to wrap this up with some practical implementation points. We covered the transition, but for new projects.
Right. As we said, existing methods are okay until 6 months after the jurisdictional data drops. For projects just getting started, especially in those Phase 1 jurisdictions Vera is focusing on initially, it might honestly make sense to wait for the VM0048 data rather than validating under an old method only to switch soon after.
Seems logical. What if an existing project wants to expand its area later on, add a new parcel of land?
If they add new activity instances, like expanding the project area, they'll need to request allocated activity data for that new area using the same process, submitting an allocation request form to Vera. It ensures the expansion is also tied to the jurisdictional baseline.
Okay. And start dates. What if project work began before the official validity period of the Vera data?
If the project start date precedes the validity period shown on Vera's website for the activity data, the project proponents should let Vera know directly. Communication seems key there.
Definitely. And reminding us how they'll know the data is available.
Keep checking Vera's website, specifically their activity data page. That's where the announcements will be made as data rolls out jurisdiction by jurisdiction.
Perfect. And just to quickly circle back, combining activities is possible.
Yes, absolutely. You can definitely combine REDD plus activities under VM0048 with other activities, like reforestation or improved forest management, accounted for under different VCS methodologies within the same project boundary. Allows for integrated projects.
Great. And lastly, this focus on administrative boundaries for the jurisdictions, how might that actually improve the risk mapping itself?
Well, by using, say, state or provincial boundaries, the risk mapping can potentially be better tailored to the specific drivers of deforestation that are dominant within that particular administrative unit, rather than using a more generic national model. It could lead to more relevant risk assessments locally.
So potentially more accurate risk profiles. Okay, this has been incredibly insightful. To sum it up, Vera's VM0048 really marks a move towards standardization, using jurisdictional-level data provided by Vera itself to set baselines and assess risk for avoided unplanned deforestation projects.
Exactly. And for you, the listener, the big picture is understanding how this changes the game in carbon crediting for REDD plus coal-form. The aim here is definitely towards increased integrity, consistency, and hopefully scalability of these vital forest protection efforts.
If you want to dig even deeper into the nuts and bolts, definitely head over to Vera's websites, that's vera.org and forestcarbon.org. We also found some good analysis on the Space Intelligence blog. We'll try and get those links into the description for you.
Yeah, definitely worth exploring those resources if this impacts projects you're involved with or following. Think about how these shifts might play out on the ground.
And maybe a final thought to leave you with. The real significance here might be this push for standardized, jurisdictionally anchored data. If it works as intended, it could be a major step in building more trust and enabling larger-scale action on reducing emissions from deforestation globally.
A crucial piece of the climate puzzle, for sure.